Light them up, boys! We're burning Saints Row to the ground!
Stillwater wasn't supposed to last forever. 2006, Saints Row entered a genre already defined by big AAA games. It didn't try to outdo them, it tried to outgrow them.
Could you turn the TV back?
Through exaggeration, through chaos. For a time, it worked. Saints Row became louder, stranger, more confident. A series that knew how far it could push itself and when to stop. Until it didn't. Then came the reboot. A new cast, a new tone. A promise to return to the roots.
Be having dreams that I'm a gangster. Drinking Moet's, holding texts. Making sure the cash came correct, then I stepped. Investments in stock. Sewing up the blocks to sell rocks. Winning gunfights with mega cops, but just a...
Saints Row didn't end, it faded. There was no final chapter, no moment where the series took a bow and walked off stage. Just a failed reboot, a studio closure, and a quiet understanding that the name no longer carried the weight it once did. In an industry that moves as fast as this one does, silence is usually the answer. But recently,
Saints Row?
Saints Row.
The old Saints Row.
Saints Row is...
Saints Row.
Saints Row.
Where did Saints Row go wrong? Why was Saints Row so poorly received?
Saints Row surfaced again. Not with a trailer, not with a reveal, but with something far smaller and far more telling. A pitch. Chris Stockman, one of the original creative leads behind Saints Row, confirmed he had been asked to propose an idea for a possible revival. A prequel, set before the rise of the Saints themselves. Nothing approved though, nothing announced, just conversation. And yet for a franchise that many believed was finished, that alone is worth examining. There is no game in development, no roadmap, no public commitment from Embracer or Deep Silver. What exists is interest, an acknowledgement that the last attempt to reboot the franchise failed to reconnect with what made it matter. Because Saints Row doesn't need resurrection through nostalgia, it needs a re-understanding. A prequel pitch suggests a shift away from reinvention and towards reflection. Not rewriting history, but re-examining it. Looking at the foundation rather than modernizing the surface. And to understand why the approach matters, you have to look back where Saints Row began. When Saints Row launched in 2006, comparisons to Grand Theft Auto were unavoidable. Open world games lived in Rockstar's shadow, and Volition knew they couldn't out-realism GTA at its own game. So they didn't try. Saints Row leaned into exaggeration, not parody, but personality. The city of Stillwater wasn't realistic. It was expressive. Characters were heightened. Dialogue was playful, and the tone balanced humor with genuine stakes.
And the police won't have a choice but to come down on them.
Okay, so we go and do some damage. How did the VKs get blamed?
Put these on.
I'm yellow enough as it is, Dex.
Saints Row 2 refined it further. The world became denser. The characters were more grounded. It's often remembered as the franchise at its most confident, not because it was subtle, but because it knew exactly what it wanted to be.
This leaked security footage shows the leader of the Saints, recent fugitive and Saint Lieutenant Johnny Gat, as well as an unknown accomplice assaulting the casino. Obviously, the 3rd Street Saints are back after a long hiatus.
We locking this city down.
Saints Row the Third pushed the confidence into spectacle. The series became louder, brighter, and more absurd, but crucially, it still felt intentional. It wasn't chasing trends, it wasn't embracing escalation. At this point, Saints Row wasn't competing with GTA anymore. It had its own identity, but identity only holds if it's anchored. Saints Row 4 marked a turning point. What began as an expansion evolved into a full release built around superpowers, alien invasions, and near total detachment from grounded tensions. For some players, it was entertaining. For others, it felt like the series crossed a line it couldn't walk back from. The issue wasn't absurdity. Saints Row always had been absurd. The issue was finality. Once you give players godlike abilities, once the world becomes a playground with no resistance, there's nowhere left to escape. The stakes disappear, and with them, the contrast that once made the chaos meaningful. Get Out of Hell only reinforced that sense. It wasn't a reinvention, it was momentum without direction. By the time Saints Row went dormant, it wasn't evolving, it was drifting. (2022) Saints Row Reboot was positioned as a return to the series' roots. In practice, it was something else entirely. Rather than reclaiming the confidence and edge earlier entries, the reboot softened them. Characters were redesigned not to provoke or exaggerate, but to appeal, stripped of the larger-than-life quantities that once defined the Saints. The humor shifted too. Where earlier games embraced satire and excess, the reboot leaned into a self-aware, risk-averse writing that rarely committed to its own jokes.
Horse balls.
It wasn't offensive, it wasn't daring, it was just cautious. The caution extended into the game's structure. Mission designs felt dated, the open world lacked density, technical issues at launch only amplified the sense that Saints Row was no longer keeping pace with the genre it helped shape. The result was a game that failed to satisfy anyone fully. Longtime fans didn't recognize the franchise they loved, new players found little reason to invest. And while the reboot wasn't the sole cause, it contributed to what followed. August 2023. Volition was shut down as a part of Embracer's Group's broader restructuring. Ending more than 30 years in the gaming industry, the closure followed the 2022 reboot of Saints Row, which received mixed reviews and underperformed commercially, contributing to Embracer's cost-cutting measures after a collapsed multi-billion-dollar investment deal. What the prequel pitch represents. The content is what gives the prequel pitch its weight. It's not a promise, it's not redemption, it's recognition. Recognition that Saints Row didn't fail because it was outdated. It failed because it lost clarity, because it stopped understanding the balance that once made it distinct. A prequel doesn't fix by default, but it creates space to explore it, to rebuild tone before spectacle, to establish identity before escalation, to understand what the Saints were before they became icons, without standing down on what made them sharp. Whether the pitch becomes a real project is uncertain. The industry is cautious, and Saints Row is no longer a safe bet. But the conversation has changed. For how do we modernize this? To why did it work in the first place? Saints Row didn't collapse overnight. It didn't fail because it changed, or because it leaned too far into absurdity. It failed because it lost the contrast that once gave the absurdity meaning. The reboot wasn't a misstep. It was a misunderstanding of the franchise's own language. And when it failed, it closed the book on Volition entirely. That's why this moment matters. Not because Saints Row is guaranteed a future, but because the past is finally being examined instead of being ignored. Some franchises come back because they're profitable. Others come back because someone believes there's still something worth understanding. Whether Saints Row ever returns or not, its story remains a reminder. You don't revive a franchise by sanding it down. You revive it by remembering why it cut through in the first place.
So what do we do now?
This is awesome. We do whatever the fuck we want.